Hello, I'm Robert, a fact checker and a science blogger. I help people who get very scared of various things, particularly with our group, Doomsday Debunk on Facebook. And this time, it's someone who just said, out of his imagination, totally nuts idea. He says that on the 21st, which is the day before the shortest day of the year, that the Earth's crust is suddenly going to slip, he says, nearly as fast as a jet plane. So you go to sleep, then you wake up the next day, and you'd look up and you'd see the South Pole and the Southern Cross instead of the Pole Star. It's an absolutely, I mean, I can hardly express how absolutely nuts it is. It would be more credible if he said that Usain Bolt is going to jump up to the moon on the 21st of December. Or if he said that the Statue of Liberty is going to do half a dozen cartwheels and then leap into Central Park. Or that Mount Everest is going to sprout wings and flutter off into the sky. I mean, it's absolutely doshed and nonsense. And I have these endless talks, talking day after day. The people I talk to, I easily spend an hour to several hours a day sometimes, talking to people, saying over and over again, the Earth's crust can't slip. The Earth's crust can't slip. The Earth is solid to a depth of 1,000 kilometers. It can't slip. This stuff is nonsense. I just say that over and over again. So now I'm doing a video to try and help these people. So how do they know that the Earth's crust can't slip? Well, I'll close this and I'll just show you. They have these. This is when you've got an earthquake. Every time you have an earthquake, then the Earth's crust vibrates, and you get these waves that go through it, different kinds of waves, and they're sort of like the waves in a pond or the sound waves, and they behave in different ways. But some of them we know can only go through solid, and they can't go through liquid. And this S wave pass, they can't go through liquid. Now, we have our earthquake detection systems. We have little things on the surface that detect vibration of the Earth. And we have lots of them all the way around the Earth, all detecting at once. If an earthquake goes off there, then all these ones here will detect it at particular times. Then here, they won't detect anything. Nothing at all. And then here, we get a kind of faint detection. And these are the ones that are kind of refracted through. And so this shows that these waves, they just can't go through. That there is liquid there, right? Because it didn't go through. It's basically a very exactly the same thing as when you have ultrasound. So if you go and get this ultrasound, they say, "Oh, you've got a boy," for a mum who's waiting for their child. Then the reason you know that is exactly the same technology, basically, as it is for finding out that the Earth has got a liquid centre. It's basically a kind of ultrasound, because the Earth is so absolutely huge. Then instead of using ultrasound, you've got to use very low frequency sounds, and you use earthquakes. In fact, we can't make sounds as low frequency and big enough and powerful enough to probe the inside of our planet. So it's a good thing we have these earthquakes, otherwise it'd be quite hard to see inside. But using them as a kind of ultrasound, we know absolutely certainly that it is solid all the way down there, or these things would stop. If it was liquid up to the surface, like this chap is claiming, this absolute idiotic idea that it's liquid, then we would only detect them up to about there. And you wouldn't be able to detect them here because of all the liquid. You just wouldn't be able to go through. So we absolutely know it's incorrect. It is incredibly out-of-date science. The chap who proposed this idea was in the about a century ago. If it was a century ago, this would be the thing. Nobody thought about using ultrasound, earthquakes for ultrasound, or they couldn't do it. And they just didn't know that the Earth was liquid, was solid down to there. And you might wonder, well, what about volcanoes? Well, volcanoes, people think volcanoes are just the liquid from underneath the surface, and the whole surface is liquid, and then it comes up through the volcanoes. That is not what happens there. Volcanoes happen where two plates slide past each other. Well, this is a very common reason for it. One plate going over another, and then where they rub against each other, you get liquid forming. And that liquid then makes a little magma plume that goes up to the top. And there could be other little things, but they're basically little spots where bits of earth, bits of the crust are rubbing against each other, and then so much they heat it up so it becomes liquid, and the liquid goes up to the top. It's just a little pocket of rock, molten rock. It's not the whole earth is molten rock, and this liquid in the centre never gets anywhere near the surface. It is just trapped there by thousands of kilometres of material. And so it's absolutely, utterly, totally impossible for the Earth's crust to slip, because it's a solid rock. It just can't happen. And by saying that, he shows he doesn't understand anything about modern geology. Nothing for about the last century has got into his mind of the things they've discovered. Absolutely vacant, totally it's like someone saying, I know how to spell. You spell Earth as R-Z-B-W. Everyone knows that. And you say, what an idiot, or what an idiotic thing to say. He doesn't have even the knowledge to be able to spell in terms of geology. It's absolutely idiotic things that he's saying, that he's scaring these people. Absolutely idiotic. And an analogy I quite like using that helps some people is these false prophets say these scary things but they've got nothing behind them. It's just hot air. It's just thin, flimsy paper. It looks a little bit scary. All there is behind there is hot air. Like a paper tiger. That's all he is. He's a paper tiger. And so I'm going to explain a little bit. Oh yes, and so his idea is a little bit like Harry Potter. So I'll just play you a little bit of Harry Potter. So you can do these things in your imagination, just make things up. Say, okay, let's imagine the world is like this. So this is Harry Potter. A little clip from it.
Excuse me. Could you tell me how to get onto the platform? Not to worry, dear. It's Ron's first time to Hogwarts as well. Now, all you've got to do is walk straight up the wall between platforms 9 and 10. Let's do it in a bit of a row. You can have us. Good luck.
Anyway, all that sort of thing is great fun in stories. You know, you can do lots of funny stories, like fun and enjoyable stories like that. But there is no, if you really were to run at that wall between the platform 9 and platform 10, you get a horrible sore head, or if you're pushing something, you just get crushed and damaged. There's absolutely, you can enjoy these things, but please don't run your life based on this nonsense. And I thought I'd explain a little bit about continental drift. So this is what the continents do move, but they move very, very slowly. If you look at that, I'll leave this running while I'm talking to switch the sound off. So these are millions of years. So on this that's every time that clicks, that's a million years, which is 10,000 centuries. So each time that number changes, it's 10,000 centuries. So it's very, very slow, really. Look, see, there's India going up and hitting into Asia, and that's how the Himalayas formed. And that's where we are now. And if you have a look back, then this is how the continents. See, it's getting wider. There's a big trench there called the Middle Atlantic Ridge, and where because as they move apart, the seafloor has to be created somehow, and so that comes up from the rock from below. Now, this is not liquid. There's nothing liquid. They're not moving around over a liquid surface. No liquid rock underneath. What is happening, and it's rather unintuitive, and this is why it took such a long time for this theory to be accepted, is that the rock itself is flowing very, very slowly. And it's kind of soft, hot rock. It's deep down, it's quite hot and quite soft. But the surface is moving as well, and that's actually flowing as well. But it flows incredibly slowly. So it turns out that if you do it really, really slowly, like over tens of thousands of centuries, then even rock can flow very, very slowly. And it's a bit like the tar that makes up roads, and there's a very long experiment of letting tar drop, and it'll just very, very slowly over decades. And if you want to know technically what's actually happening, is little orientation of crystals within the rock are very, very slightly changing, and that lets it flow a bit like a liquid. And then if you've got very huge, if you're over a very large scale, like 1,000 kilometers or something, a kilometer scale, then you can actually get it flowing, and that's how the continents move. But extremely slowly. The whole width of the Atlantic is sort of like centimeters a year. As you can see there, some of them are moving faster than the other. Australia is moving particularly fast, and so it's moving so fast that the GPS in Australia has to be recalibrated. So right now, you see, Australia's now moving quite fast. It's just suddenly did a bit of a speed up quite recently, and for that reason, then GPS is quite tricky in Australia. If you want to be really precise, to like sort of the big centimetre scale, like for tankers going through a very narrow canal or something, then you have to update the GPS every few years in order to have the precision that you need. And so we absolutely know what's going on. There's no, especially now with GPS, and that all the fossils in South America and the ones there, that fits into there. If you go back a little bit, you'll see. You'll see that's South America and that's Africa. You see, and now they just sort of split apart. You'll see that in a minute. So the reason that they actually look as they fit together is because they actually did way back in the past. Now you just watch, and there they are splitting apart. You see, that's when Africa and South America came apart. And then there was a little bit of changing and sort of changing shape a little bit, but it basically retained their shape enough so that this was one of the early reasons why people sort of looked and said, "Oh, that looks as if that might have fitted there originally." The answer is it did. So anyway. And there are loads and loads of fossils all over the place, and you can work out, for instance, Antarctica. If you go back again, that's another rather fun thing. Look, that white is Antarctica, right? So Antarctica wasn't always in the continents. If you watch how that moves, then you'll see that Antarctica was in the tropical regions, and then there's lots of tropical fossils in Antarctica. There it is, and that was quite a puzzle. How did it get there? And so it was these sort of things, especially things like discoveries of fossils in Antarctica that didn't belong there. That's why way back at the beginning of the 20th century, they thought, could the Earth's the whole crust move? Because they just didn't believe it was possible for solid rock to move. They didn't understand that point, and so there were these 2 points, and there was the theory of the entire crust moving in one unit, which seemed to make sense to them, and then there was the theory of the actual moving continents, and back at the time of Charles Hapgood, then Einstein wrote an introduction to Charles Hapgood's book, saying it was a very interesting theory, that this Charles Hapgood is the one who thought that they actually moved. So that's not so far long ago, back at the time, early 20th century, when Einstein was around, at his peak, as it were. then people did think that the Earth could have a crust. But back then they weren't thinking about it moving in one day. Nothing like that. That is just an absolutely silly idea by a nutty chap, and you shouldn't pay any attention to him. And try and learn to recognise reliable sources. So now that he said this, and he says lots of other things like this, you shouldn't listen to anything that this chap says. He obviously doesn't understand geology. He doesn't understand astronomy. He was saying, another thing he said is that we're going to have an annular eclipse, which is an eclipse of the sun when there's a big band shows around it. Maybe I could just bring that up, an annular eclipse, while I'm talking about it. This is an annular eclipse. Let's see, where images, bring up images. That's an annular eclipse, right? Like that. Where there's a great big hole around the sun. The sun, and this dark patch, and there's a sun around it. Bring up a typical annular eclipse. Or maybe I should really say tools. I suppose it's alright. Filter for reuse. There we are. That's above the annular eclipse. There we go. I did that because I shouldn't really be showing you commercial images. Wikimedia Commons. So he says that there's going to be an annular eclipse on the 26th, I think it is, and this chap says that it's going to have the diamond ring effect. So now if I bring up the diamond ring effect, that's the diamond ring effect, that's the image. Then, as you can see, that is not an annular eclipse. The sun, in fact, it happens just before the corona. You can see the beginning of the corona there, and then these lights. This is the sun actually shining through tiny little chinks, little valleys between mountains on the edge of the moon, and a little bit of the sun is left and shines through those chinks. And a little bit later it's going to be a total eclipse. That's the diamond ring effect. You can't have a diamond ring effect with an annular eclipse. It's just not possible, because the sun is too bright, and this only happens when the sun is completely, all except a tiny little bit is actually blocked. So this is impossible. So that's another thing, another example. So he's been building that into his story and saying there's going to be a diamond ring effect there, and he claims it's going to be a wedding of some sort, and in the sky, and he's got this long tail all written around this idea that there's going to be a diamond ring, and there isn't going to be a diamond ring. So he's not a reliable source. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not reliable on Christianity either, because he's giving a date for the return of Jesus. If there's anyone gives a date for the return of Jesus, then you know that they're not their theology is not sound, despite lots and lots of people doing that over the years. It seems there's a great temptation for them to do that, but the Bible says very clearly that nobody knows. So for people who believe in Jesus and Jesus' return, then for those who believe that, and many Christians also don't believe that, but for those who do, then it says very clearly that nobody knows, that neither God, neither Jesus, nor the angels, but only God himself, and never tells the others. So there is no way that he knows that, because he's not God, basically. So he doesn't know, if you're a Christian. So you shouldn't listen to people who say this. And if you are, for instance, Catholic, then there are all sorts of things that you believe would happen before as well. And so in particular, I've been trying to help people who are Catholic by saying it can't happen, because and do correct me if there's anything I don't understand here, but according to the Catholic Catechism, then they think that all the Jews in Israel will decide to be Christian. And it says in the Catechism that the glorious return of Jesus is delayed until this happens. So that's obviously not going to happen in 3 weeks. I mean, you haven't heard news on the TV that all the rabbis in Israel have suddenly decided they want to become Christian. It doesn't seem likely, does it? So that's that's not going to happen if you're Catholic and you have this belief. But at the same time, it's a little bit paradoxical, because the Catholics also say that you should be you should be ready for Jesus to return on any day. And they think of that as, I think that for them that is like being prepared to die, really, because you could die at any moment. You could die of an accident or a heart attack or whatever. It's not very likely if you're young, and it's not even very likely if you're quite old, like I am. It's still very unlikely that you're going to die on any particular day. My life expectancy is another 20 until I'm 87, I think it is. Last time I looked, we have a very long life expectancy in the now. It's increased 20 years since half a century ago. And however old you get, even if you're 90, you'll have even if you're 100, you'll have a few years of life expectancy. It doesn't mean that you'll live forever, but however old you live for, then by living through all the things that have happened before then that means that you've got a higher chance of living to a greater age. And there doesn't seem to be any sharp edge. And of course, eventually one's going to die, but nowadays we do live to great ages, and the same percentage that I can't remember I think it's age 10. The same percentage lived to age 10 in Victorian times and 10 or older now live of young children who are born now live to their 70s. So if you go back to the Victorian times, it's a huge difference in how well people on our health. And it's very rare for young people, especially. It does happen. You get, of course, people die at all ages, but your life expectancy is, as a child, is likely to be in your 80s, and this keeps increasing if you're in a developed country, and it's somewhat less in the rest of the world, but over all the world, then it's greatly increased by 20 years in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's increased by 10 years in the UK and North America. Anyway, so I think these are the main things I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else on here while I'm at it? Oh yes, magnetic field. Oh, I'll talk briefly about the magnetic thingy. So yeah, so some of you, it's not going to let me magnify because it's already quite full, quite large scale. Let's just pick it up in a new tab. Now I'll talk briefly about the magnetic thing. It's not very high resolution, that's fine. Anyway, so this is the last time the magnetic field flipped. So when I talk to you, then I can bring up this with the this picture at the same time. So the magnetic field is generated here, right in the center. No, in the outer core. Sorry, in this bit, the outer core. It's quite complicated how it forms. There's something to do with little, like sort of almost like little whirlpooly things that form there, and they kind of magnify it. Anyway, the magnetic field is just a movement of current, and so it's not an actual movement of the actual physical Earth itself. If you live in the northern hemisphere and the magnetic field was to flip, then you would still look up and you still see the pole star. The Earth hasn't moved, just the way currents flow in the centre. But the magnetic field flip is a very, very slow process. This is regarded as an extremely fast magnetic field flip. Every yellow dot is 20 years. And so it wanders around the poles. And this, to explain what this yellow dot is, then it is meant the north magnetic field pole and the south magnetic pole are actually not exactly opposite each other. They move about independently because they're just effects of currents. They're not an actual physical thing. So this is done by taking a kind of average of the magnetic field between the north and the south. So it is a kind of idealized magnet, idealized north. And this is gradually moves around like that, and it spends a long time in one place, and then it starts moving, and sometimes it starts moving very quickly. So that's 20 years, remember? So that's from there, 20, 40, 60, 80, that's 1 century. So from there took only a century. So sometimes it can move quite fast, but very, very fast is still a century to move from one hemisphere to the other, and to move kind of properly. And so at the moment both are right close near. One's a little bit off Antarctica, another one is moving towards the North Pole. Of the two magnetic poles, the two dip poles, and it would take ages and ages for these to move around towards the equator. So usually stopping for a century. Remember, this is a very fast one. Normally it's much slower. Normally it's thousands of years. This took just a few centuries. So the magnetic field flipping is not something going to happen suddenly on any particular day either. That is going to take centuries. And nothing very much happens. Indeed, if you could somehow flip the magnetic field in one day, nobody would notice except their compasses upside down and point the opposite direction. Nothing else would change. It can't happen. There was an idea a few years back, a decade or so back. There was one paper published, and they came to the conclusion that the magnetic could flip very quickly in a decade or so. But it turns out they'd been confused. It was very hard to understand physically, and it turned out that they'd made a mistake. The rock had been remagnetized in a later episode, and that was why they got two layers, one above the other, that seemed to have a very rapid change in between. And they didn't think it remagnetized because it looked solid, but although it hadn't melted, it had warmed up enough to remagnetize and then cooled down again. So it was quite a subtle error, and it just can't change as quickly as that. It can only change very, very slowly, and nothing much happens anyway. The migrating birds would get confused, but they obviously managed to survive through the last time it happened. So they must have a way of. We have the Arctic terns that go from the northern hemisphere all the way to the southern hemisphere, and spend the summer in Antarctica, and then the next summer, the northern summer, in the Arctic, and they just go back and forth like that every year. And they presumably managed to survive through the magnetic field change. So it's a bit mysterious how that. I don't know if anybody's researched into how that happened. And so anyway, so you've got the migrating birds. They get a bit puzzled. Sailors, well, you start finding your magnet, your compass point east-west, and you get multiple magnetic poles as well. So it'd be quite interesting in the middle of if you've got a compass. And the one thing that does happen that we would notice on the surface is that not instantly, but very slowly, then the magnetic field getting weaker leads to more solar radiations, more ions from the sun in magnetic storms hitting the upper atmosphere, which then changes the chemistry of the upper atmosphere, which then destroys the ozone layer. So in the middle of a pole change, we have something that it's probably not going to happen. We don't actually seem to be in the middle of one yet. It doesn't seem like one's going to start yet, because they're right up near their poles, and there's no sign really of it. The magnetic field is getting a bit weaker, but it was very strong, and it's probably just coming down from being over strong down to normal. And but if it does happen, then with the ozone layer badly damaged, then what you get is you get more sunburn, more of the ultraviolet light, which is just the part of the sunlight which causes sunburn. So you would sunburn much more easily on a sunny day, and you'd have a higher risk of skin cancer, and you would have a higher risk of getting cataracts, which is when all the sunlight affects your eyes and makes your eyes cloudy. So both of those are quite easy to protect against. You use skin cream to stop the sunburn, which we do anyway, and that also protects against the skin cancer. And you would use glasses that can protect your eyes from UV, and be sure to wear them, very much like wearing sun goggles, but not as high tech as that. And that would protect your eyes. And so maybe, well, it seems quite likely at some point in the next million years is pretty much bound to happen. Maybe in the next few tens of thousands of years, and just possibly in the next few thousand of years, then our future, our generations, great-great-great-great-grandchildren way, way down, may have to use more sun cream than we do, and may have to use glasses, at least if they want to prevent sunburn, skin cancer, and cataracts. It's not likely to cause much harm to wildlife and to species. They don't go extinct when these things happen. And I suppose we are particularly prone to sunburn because we've got naked skins, we're not covered in hair, and we have a habit of being outdoors in the sun a lot. The only other thing that would be a problem, well, there's the electricity grids, but our electricity grids are already very, very hardened to solar storms anyway. They're much more hardy than they were a few decades ago. And the studies about the effects of solar storms on electric grids really don't suggest very much would happen now, even with the biggest of these mega storms that are possible. And then there's the effect on satellites. But we have many satellites up in geostationary orbit. We have satellites we have spacecraft that fly from one planet to another, and they just get the full force of the solar storms. We've got the Parker probe that is inspecting the sun at the moment. It gets huge solar storms, and so obviously you can you can make satellites that won't be bothered by the solar storms when the magnetic field shielding is less. So there's nothing to worry about a magnetic field, a magnetic pole shift. And so, but the only reason to bring that up is because these people get confused, and they think that they talk about pole shifts, and they think they mean, and they don't even know the difference, basically. This chap Montaigne, he just doesn't have enough physics to really understand there's a difference between a magnetic and a geographic pole shift, or else, I think in his case, he has some kind of potty idea, some kind of claim that the magnetic field is related to the... I can't remember. He keeps saying different things anyway, and it's very garbled, and it seems to people who don't know much about it, then it may seem like it's sensible, but if you know what he's talking about, if you know anything about geology, or about magnetic fields, or about astronomy, and then you look at it and it's just like someone saying, oh, I know how to spell dinosaur, BWGDAFX, and you look, what on earth is he on about? Ridiculous. And then you just don't want to read anymore, because it's just so absolutely silly. Anyway, I hope this helps you a bit.